Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we are going to talk about a new book by, I still think of you as a local author, even though you've gone away from San Francisco. Her name is Kim Wong Keltner, and her new book is her first nonfiction title.
Yes.
It is called Tiger Babies Strike Back. Subtitle goes on a bit. Acclaimed Chinese-American, that's another one. How I was raised by a tiger mom, but could not be turned to the darker side.
That's right.
Sounds like you just escaped a fate worse than death.
That's right. It's like when the Death Star is pulling you in with its tractor beam and you've just escaped in the Millennium Falcon.
The other books that you've written are fiction books.
Yes.
And they are called The Dim Sum of All Things, which is, I'm sure, a deeply philosophical tome.
Yes, it is.
And the second book, I suppose, was Buddha Baby.
Yes, sir.
Another deeply philosophical tome. And the third book is I Want Candy.
Yes.
And now you're out of fiction into nonfiction, going into a field that I guess the least thing you can say about it is it's controversial. I mean, it's terribly controversial. That's an understatement. And there was a book called Tiger Mom.
Yes, it was called Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, and it advocated very strict parenting, where you didn't allow your kids on playdates, and you made them practice piano for hours and hours. And my daughter is here in the studio, and she's making faces that show what she thinks about that.
She's threatening to sneeze on air, too.
That's right.
I mean, this is a
we're tough.
Very permissive situation here. Now.
We've raised a very tough daughter.
So what we're really dealing with here is what your publisher calls the flip side of the tiger mother. It sheds light on why generations of kids have been made to feel inferior, isolated, suffocated, humiliated in pursuit of their elders' standards of success. And you put it a different way in the book, I think, if I remember this correctly. You talk about the lack of hugs.
Yes.
And the lack of congratulations. You did a good job. You talk about how you graduated from Berkeley with 2 majors. What were they?
They were art and English literature.
And with honors.
Yes.
And you didn't get congratulated for all that.
Well, I think that parents of all cultures want you to do better and better. If you got an A-, why wasn't that an A?
Yeah.
And I don't think that they're meaning to hurt your feelings. They just are aiming for the top. But in this pursuit of a straight shot to success, like an elevator that goes all the way to the top with no stopping, I think they lose sight of the fact that life is more like the Wonkavator. It goes sideways and frontways and backways.
But it spins around sometimes.
That's right, that you can't control that. And I think that because life is so unpredictable, they want to clamp down even more. And that doesn't feel great for the kid who's getting clamped down on.
No, and you start off the book, actually, with what one might call a definition of tiger babies or a manifesto. We are the survivors, you write, of the tap dance brigade, Chinese school, intermediate, interminable piano lessons. We are frustrated by our parents and spending a small fortune on therapy. My Chinese auntie once told me that if I wasn't driving a Mercedes-Benz by the time I turned 30, I'd be a total loser. And even though I'd gotten straight A's my whole life, earned a bachelor degree with a double major at UC Berkeley in 4 years, worked a full-time job while my husband was in grad school, wrote 3 novels before I turned 38, and am raising 1 great kid. Well, we'll find out about that. Do you know what my mother thinks of me? She thinks I'm lazy. Now, that's got to be disappointing.
It is, but I choose to find what hilarity there is in that situation.
I think you have to do a lot of looking myself. And yet, despite those kinds of difficulties, despite the fact that your mom was or is still a tiger mom, there are things in this book which paint or show, I guess, a totally different side of her. There's one scene at her mother's funeral.
Yes.
Talk about that. Everybody is wailing and screaming.
Sure, yes. All of her siblings, she has many siblings, everyone is crying. And I was a lot younger. This happened about 13 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I think that we're not actually studying our parents or looking at them, and when we're looking back at situations, we're trying to figure them out. And when I look back to that day, that was very sad for all of us, where everyone was crying except for my mom. At first glance, you could think that she was a hard person, not crying at her own mother's funeral. But as I think about it, she was really the one keeping it together so that everyone else could lose their heads. Mm-hmm. And when I saw her looking for her, she didn't join in on the wailing, but she was the one who was actually paying the bill. And
talking to the funeral director.
Yes, and that's equal love when you're the person who's getting stuff done. But I think that's unheralded, and I see now that it didn't mean that she loved my grandmother any less.
We're going to be talking more about this tiger mom and this tiger daughter when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Tiger babies strike back. How I was raised by a tiger mom, but could not be turned to the dark side. That's the title of the book. The author, Kim Wong Keltner, has been good enough to stop by and visit with us. And we were talking as we got to the break about your mom, and who is, we believe, a tiger mom, for sure.
That's right.
And yet there are things about her that are not, how do you say that, tiger momish?
Sure, there's a spectrum.
And one of them is sitting right here in the studio. Your daughter Lucy.
Yes.
The way she approached Lucy right from the moment of birth was not tiger momish, was it?
No, this little girl melted my tiger mom's heart.
And is she still melted?
That's right. Tiger mom's heart grew 2 sizes that day.
Oh, that's great. That is wonderful. There's another occasion that you talk of in the book that I'd like you to share with our listeners, and it's the story, as it were, of a gentleman by the name of Uncle Bill.
Yes.
And Uncle Bill is, I believe, what you call a runt, or in the Chinese family structure. What is a runt?
Well, I don't think that anyone would actually say that out loud. Okay. But I was just saying that if there can be such a thing as a tiger mom, there must be a tiger runt as well. Uh-huh. And of all of these kids who are being exalted as number 1 valedictorians, there's tons of kids who are number 17 or number 300 or not even in the top 1,000. And my Uncle Bill was someone who was very humble, who no one would have ever taken notice of, but it doesn't mean he wasn't a good person.
Tell us his story.
Well, on my dad's side, he was the youngest of 8 kids, and my grandmother was the eldest. So she, because in a big Chinese family, a lot of times, as in other cultures, the eldest kid has to take care of all the little kids. But he was very unassuming and very non-assertive, and he was pretty used to being bossed around his whole life. And it turns out that when he was getting elderly, we, my husband and I, ended up helping him clean up his house. And when he moved to another residence, we ended up moving into his home. Mm-hmm. So here was this amazing benefactor that we had, who was never important to anybody, and he liked to go down to the chicken coop on Taravel, and he worked at the post office, and he didn't drive, He was very unassuming, but he was the kindest man you would have ever met. And what I'm trying to say in my book is that these people matter. And just because he never won an award and he was never, ever number one at anything, he was a great guy.
Could you read about him on page 60, starting where it says he was never number one?
Okay. He was never number one. I never saw him in any holiday photo. No one would have ever called him the best or brightest of anything. He was a dim star in a packed Milky Way of high-achieving Chinese superstars. But let me stop and say that Uncle Bill mattered. He came and went quietly without a peep, but he was just like so many of us. He may never have achieved any conventional hallmarks of greatness and wasn't particularly good-looking, didn't excel in his profession, have children, or even drive a cool car. In fact, he didn't even have a license. But it didn't mean he didn't have wants and needs or dreams as big as anyone else's. Who was he? He was a tiger cub who never spoke up, struck back, or even talked back. There are thousands of us, millions even, all alone, inside ourselves. And to further remind myself that gentle souls always matter, I keep Bill's picture on the refrigerator. No one ever asks me about it. No one has asked me who he is, and I have not pointed him out to anybody. But he is there, and I know it. Oftentimes at potluck dinners with our neighbors, I find myself talking to someone in my kitchen, but I'm looking slightly to the side, to the picture of him. My friends and I might be laughing and having a good time. We have appetizers and drinks, but we've got no cocktail toothpicks from the Grand Canyon, which is what he liked to collect. I stand there remembering Bill as my friends talk. Despite the fact that I barely knew him, I feel like I did know him. Although he was painfully shy, his DNA is linked with mine, and so, even still, is an invisible frailty. His shoulders were always slumped over, but nonetheless, the memory of him somehow holds me up.
He really got to you. He really got to you.
He did.
Among all the super achievers, this quiet, I guess you'd call nondescript fellow, left an imprint.
Yes, he did.
It's an amazing passage. It's an amazing passage.
Thank you.
Are there others like Uncle Bill out there, do you think?
Oh, there's tons. I see them all the time. I see them on the bus, not just in Chinatown, everywhere. You know, it's the person in Walgreens who quietly steps out of your way when you're rushing past. And there are lots of people that we choose not to see, but they're there.
That is a problem, isn't it? People that we don't see, but they're there, and we should see them.
That's right, and we should celebrate them, even though they're not tooting their own horn.
Uncle Bill would never toot his own horn if he had one.
That's right.
I don't think.
That's right.
I don't think. Is there any other relative that really sticks out in your memory? I mean, you go through your entire childhood, in fact, your entire life up to this time. Mm-hmm. Is there anyone else that sticks out like Bill?
Well, sort of in contrast, I have a grandfather on the other side of my family who came over here when he was 13, and he was an orphan, and he always claimed that he lived in what is now Danielle Steele's house. So,
yes, that's the one. Yeah.
So he came over and he had a paper uncle, meaning he had papers saying there was a man who was his uncle, and he was the cook in this big fancy house at the turn of the century. And my grandfather was the little Chinese boy playing there.
Uh-huh.
And the well-to-do couple who owned the house at the time sort of took a liking to him and helped him learn English and helped him get his education. And
that's right.
And he had a lot of chutzpah, like a lot of immigrants. He was just making it up as he went along.
He's the exact opposite of Uncle Bill. You know, there are, as you say, a lot of those tiger babies out there. And when we come back, one of the things I want to do is talk about your guidelines for tiger babies. We'll do that soon.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter @JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Kim Wong Keltner and Lucy are with us today. Lucy is the daughter of Kim, and Mama wrote a book called Tiger Babies Strike Back, How I Was Raised by a Tiger Mom, but Could Not Be Turned to the Dark Side. There is ultimately a dark side in all of this, these relationships that are run the way tiger moms run them. And that leads us to another person that you cannot forget. Her name is Iris Chang.
Yes.
Tell us about her.
Go on. Iris Chang was a great writer. She wrote a book called The Rape of Nanking.
Right.
Also, The Thread of the Silkworm and The Chinese in America. She was very highly regarded, and she was a brilliant mind. And when she was 36, she died by her own hand, and it really affected me because I always admired her, and I thought, gosh, when somebody you really admire can't take the heat and decides to end it all, where does that leave you when your hero is gone?
Yeah. And is it your belief that she was raised by a tiger mom or tiger mamish fashion?
I don't know her family at all, but I do know that both her parents are scientists, and it must have been a very high-achieving family. And I think it was Paula Kamen who wrote a book about Iris she was a classmate of hers in school, talking about how driven she was and how jealous she was of Iris, who was getting all of these great gigs and such a go-getter. And she had coined this term to her students, if you want to do something, just Iris Chang it, meaning just go out there and grab that brass ring and do it.
Run.
And how impressive that all was, but obviously no one knew her inner pain. And I think a lot of Chinese Americans, a lot of people in general who are high achievers are carrying around this very intense struggle within themselves, and they don't tell anyone about it. And I would love to just let a little bit of air into that room, which is that private room where we are all so lonely.
Good for you. Now, you conclude the book in a very helpful fashion. You give tiger babies everywhere a pop quiz answers, which will definitely be on the test, so that you tiger babies out there, listen to the answers, and you'll be a happier person. The first one is have an emotional life. What are you looking for there?
Well, I just feel like even if no one is asking you how you feel, know yourself how you're feeling. Ask yourself how you feel every day. And if you're not feeling great, know that and know that you don't necessarily have to swallow that and keep smiling. I knew someone whose elder sibling used to beat her up so bad, and when you would walk in on this scene where she just got crushed, she would just break into this big smile and say, "Okay, everybody, let's be happy." And that is just so sad.
Yeah.
That I don't mean to poke fun at that, but you don't have to always pretend you're happy.
Number 2, second best ain't worth killing yourself over. I agree. And you're talking there about marks and races lost and things like that.
That's right. I remember I was always very interested in my grades, but I remember freshman year in high school, I saw this friend of mine sobbing her eyes out on the bench, and I went over and I said, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I thought that something really bad had happened, something cataclysmic, and she was holding these 2 pieces of metal from Metal Shop and the task was to solder them together. Mm-hmm. And she had gotten a B+ on our Metal Shop project of soldering these 2 pieces of metal together, and this is the first time she'd ever gotten a B+, and literally she was sobbing and was wrecked. And from a scene like that to the very serious situation where people are literally killing themselves when they don't get a perfect score, that's just horrible and really doesn't need to happen.
The next rule is, or answer is, please yourself. Maybe nothing will ever be good enough for your parents. Please yourself.
That's right. I know people who are 70 who are still trying to please their 95-year-old parent.
Oh, no.
And at some point, you just have to define success by your own terms. And you might never get satisfaction from your parents. It's just like in that movie Despicable Me, where the guy's going to steal the moon and the mom doesn't even care. He says, oh, look, I made a prototype of my rocket out of macaroni. And the mom's just saying, so what? So,
the final point in that pop quiz question is important, and I guess it's maybe the hardest part. Please yourself. Maybe you'll never be good enough to, in the eyes of your parents. Your family will have to get over it.
Yes.
And that's a big step.
It is a big step, and I describe in my book that, for me, I had to move away, a short distance away, to really shake the cobwebs out of my own head, to realize that, I'm the mom now, and here's somebody who's depending on me. I can't keep living by someone else's standards. All that really matters is this invisible thing between this little girl and me.
There are 2 more of these, but we're running out of time. And if you want to know the 2 more pop quiz questions answers, you should go buy the book. The title is Tiger Babies Strike Back. The author, Kim Wong Keltner, appearing today with her daughter Lucy. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.